Hello, I'm Hannah. Welcome to my channel, Hannah's Books. The temperatures here in Washington, D.C. have fallen a bit as we near the end of September. As always, I'm excited for autumn to start. Raking leaves, sitting outside around our fire pit, eating warm dinners cooked in the slow cooker, drinking mulled cider or mulled wine, and swapping out linen and cotton yarn for wool when I'm knitting. Of course, one of the very best parts of the coming of autumn is that time when we get to start planning out our TBRs for Victober, that month when bloggers and YouTubers around the world read Victorian literary works. This year, a subset of Victober participants are joining together to knit and listen to the audiobook of a Victorian classic. I've linked down below to the announcement videos for both sets of projects. Let's get into the challenges and how I think I'm going to meet them this year. Kate at Kate Howe sets her challenge to reread a book from the Victorian era. Although I'm always tempted to yet again reread Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, my favorite novel since I was a young teen, I've decided to meet the challenge by reading Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights instead. It's a book I've not read in almost 40 years. Days after I finished Jane Eyre for the first time, I sought out Wuthering Heights to fill that empty space in my heart that finishing Charlotte's book had left me with. I didn't hate Wuthering Heights, but it left me awfully disappointed. I was looking for something very similar to Jane Eyre, and Wuthering Heights sounded like it could scratch that itch. After all, it was written by Charlotte Bronte's sister, who lived with her in a fairly isolated landscape. It was written and published at the same time, etc. But of course, it's a very different book. My feeling of disappointment has stuck with me for the past few decades. I've known for a long time I ought to give Emily's book a fair try, to give it a chance to stand on its own, to be a book with its own themes and its own strengths. Knowing that wonder reader Katie at Books and Things loves Wuthering Heights definitely convinced me to pull it off the shelf and read it this fall. Speaking of Katie at Books and Things, her Victober challenge is to read either a book shorter than 250 pages or a book longer than 500 pages. I've chosen to read Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. Although I had previously read his Under the Greenwood Tree, I read more major works by Hardy for the first time last year, starting with Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and loving it so much that within just a few more weeks I had finished Far from the Madding Crowd, The Mayor of Casterbridge, The Return of the Native, and The Woodlanders. I really loved all of the books. Jude will be the final in the grouping of books often thought of as Hardy's most important novels, but luckily there are still several other Hardy novels in print for me to read in the future. Ange at Beyond the Pages challenges us to read a book by a female author, ideally a female author we've not yet read. I'm hoping to read Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I've read her Agnes Grey and liked it, but I've heard that The Tenant of Wildfell Hall has more of the intensity and power that her sister's novels have. I'm very much looking forward to it. I love Lucy's fascinating challenge this year, although it will clearly be the hardest one. She's asked us to choose our favorite Victorian book, and then choose and read a less well-known book published in the same year as our favorite. As it is for so many of you, Jane Eyre is my all-time favorite novel, and it was published in 1847. I'm choosing Benjamin Disraeli's Tancred, also published in 1847, as my choice to meet this challenge. Tancred is the third volume in Disraeli's Young England trilogy, but from what I've heard, it does not rely on reading the previous two books, and in fact departs from their themes a bit. It's the story of a young Englishman who travels to, quote, the Holy Land, that is, of course, the lands of Israel and Palestine. While there, the main character grapples with the ways Christian religion can be a progressive force in the development of England, and makes an argument for, quote, theocratic equality, as he experiences more about the traditions of Judaism, and I think to some degree Islam. As a professional historian, I'm intrigued to think historically about Disraeli's approach. but I admit that I'm a little nervous about reading a novel with what will surely be a dated portrayal of what is still a tense and fraught subject. It should be a very interesting experience. The additional element to Victober is knit and listen. Kate, Christy, Mel, and Natalie have suggested we all listen to George Eliot's first novel, Adam Bede, as we knit or otherwise craft some personal project. I've listened to samples of the book read by a couple of different readers and think I'm going to go with Wanda McCadden's version, downloadable from one of my local libraries. I've never read any George Eliot before, so Adam Bede will also meet Angie's additional challenge to read a female author who is new to us. For their knitting projects, the hosts of Knit and Listen have all chosen beautiful sweaters. I'm eager to watch their progress. I think I'm going to be knitting a shawl this time, the Celtic Myths Shawl designed by Asita Krebs. It's shaped as a half circle with fairly straightforward knitting for the first part of the project, and then finished with a beautiful wide Celtic cable border that's knit on from side to side. Starting with straightforward knitting should be an excellent project to knit while beginning a book. The second part of the project may not be quite as friendly for listening. I've only knit one project with a knit-on border before, and that was many years ago, so that part of the shawl will be a learning experience. I'll link below to the free pattern available on Ravelry. The shawl is really lovely and exactly the kind of thing I can imagine actually wearing this fall. I've chosen to use one of my favorite yarns, Elizabeth Lavold's Silky wool, in the bookishly appropriate colorway Graphite. Along with the rest of the Victober participants, I'll also be trying out the group challenge to read a little bit by candlelight, which may be a very little bit given that my need for reading classes is already making it rather awkward to read in low light situations. I also hope to participate in the group reads of Oscar Wilde's plays, Importance and No Importance, interestingly, possibly the text versions of the plays, but possibly by audiobook or possibly staged productions. I am so excited to join in Victober this year. I'm very much looking forward to the books on my TBR, and I can't wait to see notifications for your posts pop up in my mailbox, alerting me to this major booktube conversation, my favorite reading event of the year. Thanks. See you soon.